Hello, everybody, and welcome. You got Larson Stair here from Stair Step Strategies with another episode of Musings of an Entrepreneur. And today I am joined by the one and only Julie Penner. Julie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Larson. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. For those who don't know, Julie and I go way back. She's been a mentor of mine for many, many years. We got involved in Techstars and has been a close friend of mine and a great colleague of mine throughout the years and been hugely helpful with companies I've worked on, and it's just such a pleasure to have you here today. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Larson. Same. It's been lovely to be along your journey as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm really excited to chat with you here today, and this is really off the heels of a talk that we did at Denver Startup Week a few weeks ago around frameworks for founders. And so, if anyone hasn't checked that out, check out that Substack. I'll put a link in the comments here to make sure you can see that. There's a lot of frameworks we talked through, but there's one that in my days of running Gondola slash Demo Flow that really helped us out. But before we get into all that stuff, would you mind giving a little bit of background on yourself, the work that you're doing as a starting point, Julie?
Yeah, sure. I have been working with startups for the last 20 years. It's clearly where I'm meant to be in the world. The last 10 of those, I've been really involved with accelerators. I worked with Techstars Boulder primarily for 6 programs. So I've gone deep for over a decade with early stage companies in the accelerator world. And through that, I became both a venture partner and also a coach. So I founders are my people. I love building businesses and I love building businesses better. And I think
Mm.
frameworks are a really great way to do that, which is part of why I'm so passionate about them.
Certainly agree with you there. I mean, what they really help me out with is there's just so many unknowns as you're going throughout the startup process. And a little hack is finding somebody who's done it before. But a lot of times those people have processes or ways they've solved those problems looking at it in hindsight. So frameworks can be an incredible way to help you solve problems. And when you really have no expertise in that space or just like learning from other people on how they went and did it.
Yeah, I have heard frameworks called cheat codes. I've heard them
Mm,
called mental models. I've heard them. This was on our panel together. That was called
yeah.
a playbook. Right, those are
Hmm.
all other words for frameworks, and they can be so helpful for entrepreneurs. I was talking to one that I've learned a lot of frameworks from, and he describes it as he's been walking around his whole life picking up frameworks like they were mushrooms in the forest and
Hmm.
collecting them. And I think I'm the same way because I think they're so helpful.
Certainly. You are certainly an ocean of frameworks and ways to solve and figure out ideas. And mainly worked with dozens and dozens of startups throughout the year. So it's no surprise there. But there's one that I really, when we were talking about recording this and what would be the best framework to really narrow in on, it was the shared vision or AKA collaborative stances framework. And this helped me out tremendously thinking about how do we involve the team in decision making, particularly when you're going through really tough decisions that you need to make that have impacts to the whole team, the trajectory of the company, and what levels do we want to get involvement and how do we go about making these decisions. So maybe as a starting point, would you mind giving a little bit of an overview, if you will, of what this framework is and maybe where it can be applied?
Yeah. So this framework, it was popularized by Peter Senge in a book called The Fifth Discipline Field Book, which is a book from the 80s. So it's been around for a while. So it's obviously been pertinent. And I think decision making as humans, we don't change that much over time in terms of how we make collaborative decisions. So I think it's sort of an evergreen model. And actually, as surfaced even earlier to an 1958 HBR article. So again, organizationally, this has been tried and true and tested in a lot of ways over a long period of time. But the model is you think on one axis, it's the capacity of the team, and on the other axis is the capacity of the leader. And those two things come together so that at the highest capacity of both of those things, both the leader and the team, you may be co creating a shared vision where I come in with no agenda and as the leader, and the team also comes in with no agenda, and we form a vision together or make a decision together. I'm going to substitute vision because that's where it came from, the idea of shared vision. But it can also be used for any decision, really, so that we can make a decision together without a preconceived notion about what it could be.
Mhm.
If you step back from that one stair, so there'll be 5 stairs here. So I started at the top right. If I step back a stair, we talk about consulting. And consulting is, I describe it as having a veto. It
Mm.
maybe we come in together And I don't have a ton pre-planned as the leader, but I definitely have the right to say, this doesn't work for me, or this isn't the
Hmm.
right direction. Because I have something, some North Star that I'm holding on to, and I can veto the decision in one way or another, something that feels important. That's true in a couple of instances that I could describe. Another way I've heard consulting described is leading from the back of the class. So,
Mm.
when a teacher lets the students run the classroom, right? And they step in only when needed. That's another way
Hmm.
to think about consulting, right? So
Yep.
think about a team that is almost fully self-managed, but still needs some oversight. Whereas when you co-create, you can think about that as well as the self-managed team would be another way to think about those two
Hmm.
steps. Okay.
Hmm.
So that's like the top right. So let me go then I'll paint the bottom left,
Yep.
which is the very lowest rung is telling.
Hmm.
I think about wartime CEOs, for lack of a better term, right? Things are dire and you need to be very clear and you don't have time to mess around, to discuss, even to collaborate. We can talk about the trade-offs in time along these steps, but there's a famous example of Jack Welch, right? When he came into GE, he said, if you're not number one or number two, the industry is going to be sold. And that was his vision for the path forward. And there was a limited time window to raise concern. We were not going to negotiate. This is the vision. And if it
Hmm.
doesn't work for you, you should look for employment elsewhere.
Hmm.
And there are really appropriate times in every business
Certainly.
needs to be a telling decision. And that's as true as any other steps, right? So it's part of this framework is about getting the right kind of collaboration for the moment and the need and the capacity of the team.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's telling. One
Hmm.
step up from that is selling, where it's not a negotiation. I'm not looking for feedback as a leader, but I do want buy-in. And so I might convince and persuade, right? So I do care more emotionally about how you feel about this vision, but it's still not negotiable.
Hmm.
And that's like another level of tool. And I think that's another level of skill. So you can see how the skills are higher, even with selling and with telling.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's the bottom two, and I'm not going quite in order. But the middle is this really lovely place called testing. And again, requires more capacity on both the team and the leader than selling, so up a level, but less than consulting. So it's a step down. So right in the middle is testing. And I've heard it described as redlining or here's my idea, what's wrong with it, right? Help me edit it. What did I miss? What should we add or delete? Or take a red pen to my work as the leader. Here's
Hmm.
I'm thinking we should go. How do you feel about it, right? So that's the middle. And you can see how consulting is up from there because I'm not going to come in with as much content or as much of the work predetermined.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
at the highest level at co-creating, I'm not going to come in with anything. We're going to literally the team is going to do it. And I'm in the background as the leader, just creating like the container for values and our
Guardrails.
yeah,
Hmm.
guardrails at the
Hmm.
very, very highest level.
Hmm.
That's those are the 5 steps: telling, selling, testing, consulting, co-creating.
Co-creating. That's super helpful and a great overview. And I really like the idea of the graph of the founders like skill set plus the team skill set and bandwidth and where does that intersect? It stands the question like if you have more of a junior level team, are you doing more telling because their bandwidth and resources and the skill set might be a little bit lower? Is that kind of a general framework that you might agree or a
Yeah.
stance you might agree with?
Absolutely. So if you have a team that doesn't have a lot of trust and safety, if they don't know how to collaborate together, if you have a leader that doesn't have a lead or facilitate
Mhm.
collaboration, right, all of those things are going to lead you into that category and in the bottom in the telling and maybe the level up from that, which is selling. Those are the least skillful places. You can choose them consciously if you have more skill. And sometimes,
Mhm.
again, appropriate. But yes, absolutely. If I'm coming in with a team that uh, doesn't have some of those things, I'm gonna have to start it there, and I'm gonna have to scaffold them and help them practice the next level up. I am
Mhm.
definitely not going to be able to jump them straight to co-creating. Oh,
Sure.
just with time, I'll get here. That's not what's going to happen, right? I have to build trust and safety and skill as a leader. And that's a lot of work on these teams, right? And you start to understand where the capacity of the leader is so important, right? Because they're leading a team into practicing what the next level up feels like and how to do it
Mhm.
well.
Mhm. Yeah, just along the way gives you a sense of how do you collaborate with your teammates? What is their skill set? How does that gel in terms of the creation pieces of that as you're moving from one step up? But if you go from telling to co-creating, it could be a pretty harsh transition because we don't really know how we best all work together, especially in the early days of bringing on employees or starting a company.
Yeah, it's really you're not gonna have the skillful collaboration most likely or the trust and safety, right?
Hmm.
It's likely what's gonna happen and it probably will blow up, right?
Hmm.
I did this framework as a Socratic seminar, and someone who was working in a startup said, "I worked with a company where the founders wanted to co-create everything from day one." And it sounds like such a lovely vision. Like, it sounds like the perfect place to work. And she said it was total chaos. Nothing got accomplished, and it was horrible. It was so
Hmm.
dysfunctional, right? It really is a journey on each team and with each leader leading a container, creating containers for teams to move up those levels. I have some more thoughts about how to do that and some examples, but
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
really is that take the journey is the
Yeah,
invite.
for sure. And I can distill out some reasons why founders may find this meaningful in terms of a framework. But what would you say in terms of when you're in the early days? I can even think of my specific situation, but why do you think this is meaningful for them and how does it help them with
Yeah.
building a team and working with them?
Yeah. I've got a couple. One is I think it's a powerful drama reduction act. Just like if you want to have a good meeting, you might have an agenda, you might have someone have rules like a timekeeper or a scribe, like depending on how much discipline you have in your meetings. This is also something you can add to your meetings so that when decisions are flagged on your agenda, you can also decide what the collaborative stance is. And
Mm.
that tells people right up front how much feedback you're looking for so that they don't end up in the following scenario. And everyone has had this happen at work where a leader has presented a decision and that people in the room gave feedback and then all of it landed on the floor. None of it got used. The thing that the leader said is exactly what happened without any, because they weren't clear that they weren't looking for feedback, right? They didn't
Mhm.
close the loop. And that's a real trust break within a team dynamic. And so when you can say to the most beautiful I ever saw this was a CEO who came into a room and it was clearly a selling decision. They didn't say that, but they had heard from their new private equity owners about a decision, right? So it was not up for discussion.
Mhm.
And they said to the team, "We're here today to discuss a decision that's already been made," right?
Clear.
Let's have your feelings, comments, concerns about it, right? But it was not like, "Hey, what are we going to change here? How can we undo this?" Right? And they didn't spend time and waste their time and energy on trying to get the decision to be something else or
Mhm.
to provide feedback on it. They were spending their time digesting, processing, and integrating the decision and how they were going to move forward, how they were going to tell their teams, right? It was so much more productive and it was really skillful.
It's incredible. It's
Yeah.
incredible. Well, it also gives people a clue as in, I like that even putting in the agenda, training your team on what this all means, how we're going to go about making decisions. And it allows them to know if there's an open door or a closed door here. Like I can speak and I can let my feelings be heard, but I'm not here to try to convince you as the leader that we need to do this a different way. If it's been told to me that's not the case. And it's like, okay, a more efficient use of time, perhaps, and gives the expectation set up front.
And then at higher levels, right? Say you're doing testing or consulting and you're clear about that, right? People who are in the room know how much feedback you want. Oh, you want my feedback at the edges, or you want me to help you really envision this, at a wide different array of possibilities for really how much convergence and divergence are we going to have in this meeting before we decide on land on something we agree on, right? So I do think it's clearer, it's explicit, it's that all of that is drama reduction. That's the short-term benefit. I think there's a long-term benefit as well. And that is as you progress in the size of the company, one of the challenges is to get out of the way of being the person who makes all the decisions. And it's actually really challenging for leaders and founders to empower the team. Right? I was just talking to one of my clients is a 50-person company, and they're like, it feels like the team's really passive. And it's like this challenge is they need more scaffolding to get them to the next level of shared decision making. And it's going to be work. And they need to be more clear about and being quieter as leaders, leading less from the front, right? And being clear about what kinds of feedback. And this is the really skillful part. Start small as you build trust with teams at the next level. So it's like if you're moving from selling to testing, right? That like mark up my vision. Don't do it with the purpose or vision, mission of the company, right? Don't do it with something.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
it with something small,
Yep.
and then make the turnaround of your feedback and your gratitude for that feedback really quick, right? That
Yep.
okay. So that's a small engagement. They can try. What is it like giving you feedback? Did it go well? Oh, they liked it. Okay. Now I have a little more safety and security giving feedback because so many of us are wounded from giving feedback at prior companies, and either not
Mhm.
listened to or being called a dark cloud or, you know, being told they're wrong or that they're the
Negative. Yeah.
negative. Yeah, all these things,
Mhm.
right? We have a lot of warning out there from giving feedback. And so making that not only the container where feedback is welcome, but also in showing people how to get feedback in healthy ways.
Mhm.
If you give feedback in this way, when I've asked for it, it's going to be very well received. Oh, okay. Like we talk a little bit in leadership about making others feel um, heard, heard, seen, understood, right? These are ways we can do this. And it's ways that we can show employees how to show up. Well, if
Mhm.
you show up in these ways, it's easy for me to hear you. So it's a little bit them coming to you and a little bit you coming to them. That makes sense.
Mhm. Very much so. What I also like about it too is when you start small enough, which is certainly the right place to start, right? We're not talking about getting co-creating or getting feedback on the vision of the company. That's not the best place to start. Let's start on a marketing campaign and something that's pretty low risk. You're talking a bit about how does it help that employee to give feedback and learn how that the recipient to the feedback, how they receive that. I would also argue it coaches a founder on how to give away power and give away
Mhm.
decision making because that is a process and that is a practice that needs to happen with time where you
Mhm.
learn to trust your employees and not the age old, well, I can just do it faster myself. So let me just do it faster myself. It's like,
Right.
that's not a way to scale. Like, that's not
Right.
how we build good companies here.
And when you become at the center of decision making and eventually at the center of even visioning, at some point you will become the limiting factor on the growth of your own business.
Yeah.
Right. So
It's all crushing.
you have to enable others around you. And this framework, this is why it's like a such a powerful framework is because it gives you a roadmap
Hmm.
for how to build that self-empowered team over time. But again, it's the like, if I start out telling and selling, then I'm going to run it tens and 20s of times into testing. And then as we get better at testing, then I might have another little test as we get really comfortable in testing, try consulting and then back something small
Hmm.
again, and then drop back to one of the other levels. And again, it's not, oh, one day I'm in selling and then I'm teaching about testing and then I'm going to move to that level. It's not like that. It's like I have available for the team as a leader, whatever the highest level that we have practice in. But I'm going to match the decision to whatever the right style is, right? If it needs
Hmm.
selling and you have the capacity all the way up to consulting, but it needs to be telling, you tell.
Yeah.
So you incorporate those levels beneath you and use them appropriately.
Hmm. So one that does beg a question. So there are five different levels that we've walked through here. As founders think about deciding which path they're going to walk, it seems you mentioned earlier that there is a time element to this. How do I go about deciding where I should begin? Like this is a big problem. Where do I begin on this? And then how does time factor into each of these different five stages?
Yeah. So there's short term and a long term here, right? So billing and selling there, but tilling in particular is the fastest in the short term. But in the long term, it could be ultimately slower
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons.
Yes.
Factor flawed. As you move up the ladder, collaboration takes more time. So I'll give a story that I heard from one of the founders of Rally Software. Ryan Mertens, he talked about they were at 100 people, and he realized that the founders' shared vision was a bottleneck, right? That he and his co-founder Tim Miller, they were holding the vision, and people kept coming back to them, right? And like checking in on the vision, but it was holding back the company and not empowering the teams to own and envision what could be possible for the company going forward.
Mhm.
They took a year and they did work at every level throughout the company to create this shared vision. And when they finally revealed it to the company after a year of work, people could see themselves in the vision that was created. And that was a huge buy-in moment. That was 3 years before they IPO'd.
Mhm.
And for Ryan, it was a real opening for people to feel empowered to share that vision with them. So again, that's what it looks like, I think, to co-create or an example. And it took a lot of time. But what it unlocked was massive.
Mhm.
Right? Versus a leader who could have said the vision and wouldn't have taken that year of work, but wouldn't have had the same kind of agency show up and psychological ownership show up and ideation and creativity and innovation that you need inside a company to get to a place like that. Like that's more than any one person can own.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree, and that one in particular resonates with me quite a bit because when we first started Demo Flow, as we do in Techstars, let's set the founding values, if you will. That was a telling maneuver. Frankly, there weren't that many people at the company to like co-create a ton. Like, we had a handful, but we actually revisited that maybe a year or 2 years later, but it was after we had a good group of people that we really felt strongly about. Like these are really A players. We really like them. We like them professionally. They're doing good work. We like them personally. These are the type of people that we want at this company. And that's where we switched the decision-making stance a bit more towards, co-creating a bit. We feel pretty confident that if we were to re-architect our values as a company, we could probably get it way closer to what we should be and what this group of people may want and feel more closely with. And it turned out to be certainly true. Like it was much better kind of founding values or secondary take at founding values.
Yeah. I am glad you tell that story because actually values is one of the places where I often teach consulting
Mm,
rather than co-creating, only because if that group of people would have suggested a value that was the antithesis of you or your co-founder, you would have vetoed it, I think.
mhm,
It's partly because you can't easily go to another company, and so those values have to be concomitant with the personal values of the founders. So it's a really
mhm,
good example of you can show up and again have no agenda and be open to whatever they create with you. But I bet that they probably didn't have a vetoable value that came up, but if they would have, I think you would have, which
that
is interesting.
makes yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I love doing that work with values when there are like 10 or more people, like
Mhm,
we're a small group and you've been going for a little while. Yeah, it's a great use of explaining and right and saving that veto power for founders is a great way of setting expectations. Like, hey, if there's something here that is really and at the antithesis of the core of why we started this company, it reserve the right to go different, like to say no.
yeah.
Even that, right, can sidestep drama later if it happens.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And so let me ask you this. This is a little bit off the cuff, but I'm curious if you have an idea around it. Are there like, because we just talked about values and how I was sharing my personal experience on how we went from maybe probably more likely selling to co-creating later. Do you find that any of these five are better for different parts, like different use cases within a company? Like values is could be co-creating, but maybe it's more consulting because then you want that veto right. Are there other things that you can think of that which really fit squarely into one way or another?
I think when there is an emergency or a pivot or something else is on fire, I think that's a time for telling.
Hmm.
So COVID happens,
Yep.
right? And you better lock yourself in a room with whatever leadership you have and walk out with a telling decision because that's
Hmm.
also what people want in that moment.
Yeah.
Clarity or like the server room is on fire, right? What are you going to like? You're going to take action to stabilize the system. And that's, it's back to call it wartime CEO, but like a chaotic moment or a moment of great uncertainty where time's not on your side. Uh, that's a great place for telling. The other ones, I think I I don't have hard and fast rule. I like again, I have at the end and then the at either end.
Yeah. Yeah.
In
Sure. Yeah.
I can see that there are some things here about founders typically care about some things a lot more than others.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
this is also a way to broadcast and be aware, even self-aware as a founder about the things that you feel more ownership over. Right? Again, it's
Mhm.
okay to not have drama, right? Actually, I want this to be a testing decision because I have 20 years in sales and I have something to say about our go-to-market strategy. And you can mark it up, but I feel really strongly about this, given my expertise. No, knowing that the ownership there will be less shared and you're going to trade some things off. But maybe that is your gift to the company. So another founder I know is also very clear about what his purpose is in the company, and for him, he's a very visionary kind of person. He tends to think more ideas and very much in theater state. So if they were in that work, I think and it was his responsibility to come in as the leader, he might drop back a couple levels because he has more clarity
Mhm.
about where they're going or its greatest strength and gifts to the company is on that plane. So I can also see that being a way to own your gifts and to be clear that you have strong feelings about something in particular. And you can also notice, right? Do I have strong feelings about everything? Well, that's probably I'm limiting the growth of my company, right?
Mhm.
All I can get to is selling on technology, go to market, product, customer service, fundraising. You're not the same level of proficiency in all of those things. We're open to other.
Pick what you want. Yeah. Pick the right one. Yeah.
I'm curious for you. You have a sales background or go to market
Mhm.
background. Oh, your co-founder had more of a technical background.
Mhm.
Where would you have been most open between the two of you to the moving up the ladder?
Yeah. Yeah, I think 2 examples here, and one that's I was just thinking about this. Can a category or a decision ever be 2 as opposed to 1 stance? And what I was thinking about was when we went through a product pivot. So we switched from a presentation software to more like Playbook, a call agnostic. If we were gonna make the pivot was certainly a probably a telling/selling type of maneuver. This is the direction that we're gonna go. How do we go about doing that? What is the feature prioritization there? And how do we like the minutia of the execution? I think we ended maybe testing consulting a bit because we viewed our job as to point in the direction, and then how do we navigate the map, so to speak, is up to the experts in their own category. And I think that's back to what you just said. You can't be telling on everything, every single step. Probably not the most fruitful way about doing it. So can it be two at once almost?
I mean, I've seen it from CEOs who think they need the answer or they have the best idea for everything. It's
Mm.
just they top out in terms of what they can build very quickly, and they will only attract a certain kind of person to work for that company. They want to attract the best talent.
For
Uh,
sure. For sure. They won't stay either if they're good.
yeah, right. How can it be two?
or it's almost like a cascade of sorts where we're going this direction. These are the reasons why, but we need your help on how we get there and how do we rank. Like in this situation, it was a product that we're building. So we needed engineering's buy-in and frankly, their involvement in how do we get there.
What's interesting, what I'm hearing in that is actually there were two different decisions,
Mm. Oh, sure. Yeah.
right? Do we pivot was one,
Hmm.
and then how do we pivot was something different, right?
Hmm.
And it does this is the hard part about mapping collaborative stances back to an agenda, in my opinion, because you can get into a meeting and realize that there are more decisions to be made. And
Hmm.
you can follow the rigidity of that directive of having a collaborative stance for everything too far because there's all these micro decisions inside a larger decision. So there is a balance here as well to strike what are the big decisions. And even that's a great example of teasing apart. Okay, here's the biggest decision. It's at this is their level of feedback. And then what are the subheadings there? And then having a different collaborative stance for those. Yeah, that feels interesting
Yeah.
and more viable. Yeah, so
Sure.
it can for sure be. I mean, you can go into think about like I have everything nailed down except for how to do this, right? And I want to co-create this. And wow, what clarity. What an
Hmm.
effective meeting
Hmm.
for everyone. The founder who taught me this framework was talking about he had installed a lot of discipline about meetings within their company and really talked about how our ability to collaborate is what differentiates us just as a species, right?
Hmm.
As
Hmm.
humans, right? Animals can build molehills, but humans can move mountains. And the difference is our ability to collaborate. And so the other name for this framework, collaborative stances, is really descriptive, right? How much collaboration do you want, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because these upper steps of this framework allow for the highest and best ideas to be created and collaborated and owned amongst a group of people. And that's where you see the richness of humanity has unfolded. Not to get
Hmm.
existential, but
Yeah. I mean, it's completely true. It's well said. Yeah. One thing I noticed in your article that you wrote about a collaborative stance is I think it was co-creating is the most challenging or most time consuming and all that. Do you have any like hacks or ways to go about, let's say that your team has gotten there where you recently got to that stage. How do you like set up a meeting to do that effectively and make sure maybe also make sure as you as the leader, CEO, founder, whatever is not too dominating in that, you take a step back like as the teacher in the back of the room. Do you have any ideas about how to go about approaching that?
yeah. So even consulting, you're at the back of the room.
Mhm. Okay. Yep.
That's one of those really hard lessons for founders, but especially CEOs, is how much your voice carries. As soon as you put your words in the room, oh, I want to make the CEO happy. We'll do that. Right.
Mhm.
And so being quiet and in the back of the room and is step one. And that's already hard for a lot of leaders, a lot of founders, right? You will bias your entire group when you open your mouth and you carry a really big hammer. It's so hard to learn that. So that's one. The second is the skill building that the team needs. It's not just about practice at the next level. You also need groups of people who have that safety and trust together. So now you lay the groundwork for them to know and trust each other. So they probably have skills around healthy conflict,
Mhm.
right? And that I find is skills you have to build intentionally. They need some just knowledge about each other. So I do this work with teams that, where are we likely to have conflict just based on our different personalities, behaviors, and values, right? So we can find our patterns faster and navigate those more skillfully. And then there's some discipline around what we're doing here. What decisions are we making? What did we come here to make? And you'll know you're getting it right. There's this really great study. It's called the Aristotle study. And it was a Google study about what were the highest performing teams. And they studied like 1,000 teams at Google. And what they found that the highest performing teams had nothing to do. They were not correlated with their skill sets or their what universities they were from or how many degrees they had.
IQ or yeah.
Yeah, none of it. What mattered was psychological safety. uh, And that was measured by, did they feel cared about in the group? Especially from the leader, but in general as well. Do they feel cared about? And was the amount of talking between people in the group roughly equal?
Mm.
So I don't know if I have hacks, but I do have, that's like a health metric for
Yeah.
how are you on the cookery, right? So yeah, there's actually really cool AI now and meeting stuff where you can if you do a virtual meeting, it will give you statistics on how, like a pie chart on how you broke up the meeting in terms of talk time.
Hmm.
Well,
That's
go look at your
great.
pie chart. Is it
Totally.
pretty equal or is it,
Yeah.
are there, right? So, okay, well, what happens if it's really unequal and there are a couple loud voices and a couple quiet voices?
Mm.
How level that out? It's a reason why other skills I teach around quiet work or when we do silent work on sticky notes and then share out, it levels the voices in the room. So this is where, again, skill building on a team, you don't do overnight, but it's really about, I think it's all towards that. Can you get loud voices and quiet voices to carry equal weight
Yep.
in meeting? And then as the leader, can you create the container, get out of the way?
For sure. That sparked a thought or a hack. I don't know if I did it intentionally when we were running the company, but one observation I had is almost at a departmental level. Some people are louder speakers and more vocal, sales, and some people are a little bit quieter, engineering at times. And what I'd really try to place an emphasis on, and there's two things, was came from Simon Sinek, and I think he was quoting Nelson Mandela. He said, "Always be the last to speak in the room. If you're the leader, like be the last to practice that. Then you hear everyone's perspectives, and then you can formulate something from there." To your point, it doesn't kind of taint the well. But I didn't let people be quiet. I asked you what your opinion was directly in a group meeting. So I'd be like, Julie, I haven't heard from you in a while before I'd say anything, or I'd extract those pieces out from people. And if they didn't have anything, that's fine. Like, it's not like you have to say something, but I'd call them out. I'd be like, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this? And I think people got used to that style with time. So it wasn't like too direct, but it worked to extract good ideas from people because I certainly don't think I have all the best ideas. And I bet the team has far better ideas than I do at times.
Oh yeah. I love that invitation. I want to hear from anybody who hasn't spoken already as an
Yeah.
invite.
Hmm.
But also totally nonverbal tools because you'll still get people who will not engage with a direct ask. So if you can put sticky notes on a wall or on a digital whiteboard, or even voting, right? So I've seen
Mm.
it. Um, Fist of Five is another tool.
Yep. Great
Vote
one.
1 to 5, right? Somebody throws a two and they haven't said anything in the meeting. You can't get mad in that moment, right? This is where the skill comes in,
Yeah.
right? The reply is, what data do you have to add to the discussion? But again, they have a way to express where they're at that is nonverbal. Again, this is where the skill building, right? When I say capacity of the team, capacity of the leader,
Mhm.
kinds of skillful communication and collaboration. That's what I am talking about. And it takes time to learn those tools.
Certainly. Well, especially in this virtual world too. I think on one hand, it's harder, but also maybe easier in the virtual world because you have solutions like Mural, where you can create a board and everyone gets sticky notes and then let's vote on it from there. If you find these little hacks to extract good ideas out of people, but create an even playing field so that the one people you don't get ideas from just a handful of people that have the courage to speak up. You've got to create that space where even if they don't want to speak, they can write it down, they can vote on it. However, people want to communicate those ideas, you got to create those lanes for them to express themselves and say what they think.
Totally. And I can see that your skill went up over time and getting others to bringing people in, and you could see it would just continue.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they would get more used to it. And the other thing is that if your company continues to grow, you will continue to have new people and you have to continually learn or like teach these skills to anyone who's new to the team, right? So you also have to train the trainers to go out and do this, right? A lot of this is learned by doing.
Yep.
Well, you can see the lift here for leaders. Like there's a huge payoff, but the lifting, the energy that's required to build these skills up amongst your team, right? That is not to be overlooked. It is in
Hmm.
addition to or in place of making all the decisions. Right? I gotta find the solution because that's where you are when you first start out in a company, right? I gotta have the answer. I gotta figure out how to do this. We've never
Yeah.
done that. Blah, blah, blah. And it's so hard to stop doing that and letting the other people do all those things so that you can do this job, which is lifting other people up.
It's really well said. For me specifically, well, I'm a salesperson, so I naturally might gravitate more towards the telling, selling side of the spectrum here. And maybe more in the earlier days, call it 2020, when we were just getting started out. That's probably where I gravitated more. It's more natural for me. But it's just, it gets exhausting to be making all the decisions and telling everybody what to do all the time. And there's so many decisions to make. So the quicker you can get to further down that food chain and making sure that other people are, you're okay with other people making decisions and you're okay with what happens if they fail there, like that's better. It's a way better place to live. And then you can really make better decisions that where you really need to make those decisions.
You're spending your energy in the right places, but it's taken an investment. I want to tell one other quick pitfall
Hmm.
are that it sounds like an easier alternative to founders so they can find themselves in this way if they don't do the skill building. So again, this is a story from a founder. He said, I realized I was the bottleneck to decision making. So I decided to get really quiet, right? I'll just not say anything. It sounds a little bit like what I was talking about from the back of the classroom, but it's different, right? I
Hmm.
will just say nothing. And what happened was the people in the company then just tried to interpret harder,
Sure.
right? So Larson put his head to the left, so he must want us to launch on the
Yeah.
East Coast, right? Where there
Yeah.
people are stretched even more to make you happy because you
Hmm.
haven't scaffolded them into the making a decision on their own and ownership of the decision, right? So
Hmm.
but you can see how it can go wrong. I'll just
No,
stay
yeah,
quiet
for sure.
and that'll work. No, no, no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
no. It has to. That's the progression in the work we're talking about, right? So you see, and it will happen like in gossip about like, well, you were in a meeting with Larson. Well, did he say what did he say? People are really like trying to listen so hard for what you said because you made it less clear
Hmm.
by being quiet. And instead of stepping into that role, they're just gonna, oracle you. And
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's certainly not moving from phase to phase is an active process for that leader and not something that's passive where I just, oh, if I just be quiet, everyone else will speak up. Like, no, 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 you have to create those boundaries, make sure people feel okay with your words and maybe tell them. And frankly, what
practice.
could probably help with this is educating the team on this stance, making sure we all have a good idea of what this is and how we're going to label things. So again, the expectations are set there that I expect collaboration here. I want your feedback. I'm purposely going to take a back seat here a bit and listen and create some guardrails for a discussion.
Yep. Yep. And if you don't get it, right, then you've gone too far and you need to drop back and be like, okay, well, here's my idea. Tell me what's wrong with it? Right.
Hmm.
Back to the testing piece and go back to the building safety and practice at the red line, my idea until that's comfortable and then try again. The other thing, we haven't talked about it, but if you're consulting and you're the teacher at the back of the classroom, like it could go wrong. Right? Students get off topic and now they're throwing food at each other, right? And so you might have not all of your experiments in scaffolding your team up the next level are going to go great.
Hmm.
And that's okay. If you play an infinite game, you're like, all right, that didn't go, okay, let's go back one and practice some more here. And we'll try again, maybe something smaller or again in the future, right? It's not a failure forever. It's like the team's just not ready for it. My capacity and their capacity didn't meet that and whatever the decision was, one aligned. So again, like, you can be really high at the capacity of the leader, but if your capacity of the team is low, it's still at telling or selling. Same thing. If the capacity of the leader
Hmm.
is really low and the
Hmm.
capacity of the team is really high, you're still at the bottom left, right? Or at that telling, selling uh, place. You need to be the appropriate decision and the right capacity for both groups. And that you're not always going to get that right. And
Hmm.
that's okay. Doesn't mean you did it. It just means there's a learning opportunity and to go back and evaluate like what the capacity of both groups are, right? One, maybe you find out that your team has more capacity than you do as a leader, right? And you need to go back and get more skills.
Yep.
Cool.
There you go. But the key behind this is an introspectiveness of reflecting back on something that may have gone well or not well, and looking at that critically at yourself. Maybe it's like, okay, maybe that was a little bit too early. How do we want to approach this differently? And retros can be great for that type of stuff. And just, and also having a good co-founder to bounce ideas off of and having that stance about what we're going to be doing ahead of time and then constantly refining it with time.
I mean, if I were to give advice for how to learn, like the smaller and more intimate the group, the better it is to start because you have the trust. So if
Sure.
you wanted to try this ladder and felt like you were at the beginning, being clear with your co-founder or co-founders on what the collaborative stance is would be a way to practice because hopefully you have some trust amongst you,
Yep.
right? And then out from there would be your leadership team or a subset of the leadership team that is
Hmm.
guiding things. Right. Like I also would not recommend blasting it to the whole company, trying to install it as a system. Like this is much better learned with less consequential, smaller decisions as you go up the progression and in groups that already have trust and safety. And then building that trust and safety in other groups using some of these tools.
That's wonderful. Well, Jill, this has been really great to get this overview here and go really into the weeds and talk through specific examples about these 5 different stances. So I really appreciate you spending some time here today. Before we let you go for the day, tell me a little bit more about the work you're doing today. If I'm a founder, I started a company, what might you be able to help me with? What problems might you help me solve? Like, where do you fit into the startup ecosphere? And tell me a little bit more about that work.
Sure. So I've got this project I'm very passionate about frameworks. I don't know if it comes across, but I have this project called Frameworks for Founders where I talk to founders about how they've installed certain frameworks like this one into their company so that it becomes very actionable and easy to learn. And that's over on Substack, frameworksforfounders.substack. And you can dig a little bit deeper there. We'll have more content coming out. And then on the soul of startup side, I've written a lot about founders and company building. And if you like some of what you've heard today and how I think about building teams, you can find more of that at soulofstartups.com or on my Medium posts. So
Yeah. And I can just
that's on page.
look, and if I want to get in touch with you, LinkedIn, Julie Penner, just
Yep,
find you
link-
right there. And
you can
any
find me
email
on
address
LinkedIn.
there?
You can send me a note on any of those places, either on an article, comment on an article on Medium or Substack. I love to engage in those ways. So
Excellent. Well, Julie, thank you again for taking some time to chat with me here today. It's been a pleasure. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
thank you, Larson. It's been a pleasure on my side too.